Warm light spilled through the warped blinds of my rented office, turning the air into a slow-moving aquarium of dust. The building used to be a discount furniture store, and it still smelled like varnish and old carpet, no matter how often I cleaned. I had a stack of receipts from a corner cafe, an open spreadsheet, and a calculator that kept sticking on the same button. I was halfway through untangling their sales tax when my phone vibrated once, then again, as if it had something urgent to confess. The name on the screen hit me harder than any headline ever did. Leona, my daughter. The last time we spoke, she told me I deserved to rot alone. I stared at the ringing like it was a live wire, then answered before fear could talk me out of it. Her breathing was steady, controlled, the kind of calm people practice for courtrooms and funerals. "He's gone," she said, not Dad. Not even his name at first, just a verdict. Then she added, "Gideon, service on Thursday. The will is read Friday at 1. Barron, Pike, and Fielding, you'll come." It wasn't a question, it was an order. I tried to say something human, something that sounded like a mother instead of a defendant, but she kept going, each sentence clipped like she was reading bullet points. "Don't make a scene. Don't talk to anyone. Don't ask me for anything." There was a pause, and in it I heard something I didn't recognize, like satisfaction hiding behind manners. "He never changed his mind about you," she said, and her voice sharpened as if she needed that truth to stay intact. "He made sure I understood what you are." The call ended before I could even ask what she meant by "you'll come." I sat there with the phone in my hand until the screen dimmed. The silence felt staged, like a courtroom after the gavel drops. I counted without meaning to, the way I always do when I'm trying not to panic. 21 years since my arrest. 21 years since my name turned into a warning label. 21 years since my daughter stopped looking at me like I belonged in her life. His name was Gideon Hart, and for a long time he was the safest place I knew. We met at a community college night class, two exhausted people pretending we weren't hungry for a future. Later, we built Hart Ledger Group from a cramped suite above a pawn shop, grinding through 16-hour days, arguing over coffee, celebrating tiny wins with takeout eaten straight from containers. When Leona was little, she'd fall asleep under my desk while Gideon and I negotiated loans and promised each other it would get easier. It did until it didn't. By the time Leona was in secondary school, we had 3 floors in a glass building downtown, a staff big enough to fill an auditorium, and clients who treated Gideon like an oracle. He wore the praise easily. I wore the work. I was the one who checked, double-checked, and stayed late to keep the engine from seizing. Still, when people spoke about us, they said Gideon's firm, as if I was a decorative feature like the lobby fountain. I didn't correct them, because at home we were equal, and in my naive head, home counted more than strangers. Morning, everything broke. The sunlight on the high-rise windows looked harsh, almost white. 2 agents and a uniformed officer walked into my office without hesitation, as if my door had been waiting for them. They said my name like it was already on paper, already filed. They didn't yell. They didn't have to. The click of handcuffs did all the shouting. I remember the way my assistant's face collapsed, how phones seemed to stop ringing at once, how the corridor felt miles long when they escorted me through it. Cameras flashed outside, hungry and organized. The next day, my photo was everywhere with a caption that turned my life into a simple story. "Finance chief accused of theft." They claimed $1.8 million had vanished through fake invoices and offshore transfers. People loved that part, the offshore detail, because it sounded cinematic. No one wanted the boring truth that money can disappear through panic and bad decisions as easily as through greed. Gideon didn't speak to the press. He didn't need to. His silence made him look dignified, and my silence made me look guilty. I signed the confession because the alternative was a slow-motion death. Not mine. His. Gideon had a heart condition he hid like a vice. On good days, he joked about it. On bad days, he held his chest and pretended it was indigestion. When the internal audit flagged the gap, he didn't sleep for a week. His hands shook when he poured water. The night before my plea, he sat at our kitchen table and kept whispering that he couldn't survive prison, that stress could stop his heart, that Leona couldn't lose both parents. The thing about love is that it gives you a list of reasons to be foolish, and they all sound noble in the moment. I told myself I was choosing the least harm. I told myself Leona needed stability, even if it meant stability with a liar. I told myself I could rebuild a career later that my daughter would understand when she got older. Gideon cried when I said I'd take it, and the tears looked real enough to convince me he'd spend his life making it right. Keep her safe, I told him. That's the only debt you owe me. He swore he would. He swore I would never be forgotten. He didn't say thank you. He said, you're strong. Like strength is a substitute for justice. Prison doesn't just lock your body away. It teaches time to mock you. Days stretch, then snap, then repeat like a loop you can't escape. I did 13 months in a federal facility that smelled of bleach and overcooked vegetables. I learned how to keep my face neutral, how to sleep lightly, how to swallow rage without choking. I wrote letters to Leona on every birthday, every holiday, every random Tuesday when I missed her so badly my hands went numb. Most came back unopened. Some never returned, which was worse, because it meant she might have read them and chosen silence anyway. Gideon filed for divorce while I was inside. His lawyer made it quick, neat, efficient. Full custody of Leona, no visitation. A restraining order framed as protective. He rebuilt the firm with a new compliance team, a public charity campaign, and a story that painted him as the betrayed husband who still showed up for his child. And in that story, I was the monster. When I was released, a job application felt like a confession all over again. I opened a one-room bookkeeping service in a strip mall outside Merrow Bay, next door to a phone repair shop and across from a laundromat. My sign was small on purpose. I wasn't trying to be found. From a distance, I watched Leona become exactly what Gideon needed her to be. She studied law in the Capitol, landed at a firm famous for tearing opponents apart with smiles, and posted professional photos where her eyes looked colder each year. She didn't have my laugh. She had Gideon's composure and Gideon's talent for turning softness into weakness. I learned her milestones through public announcements and whispered updates from an old colleague who still sent me pity disguised as news. I told myself I didn't deserve direct access to her life, that earning it back would take time and proof. But then, right after that call, I sat in my dim office and realized I had never been given a fair chance to prove anything. Gideon had sealed the story before I stepped out of prison. He turned my silence into evidence. He turned my sacrifice into a weapon. And now he was dead, and my daughter's voice carried an edge that sounded less like grief and more like victory. That terrified me more than the will reading itself. People don't sound triumphant at funerals unless they think the ending finally favors them. The memorial was held at St. Alders, a stone cathedral in the heart of the city, the kind of place where footsteps echo like judgment. Rain threatened but never fell, hanging in the air as a gray promise. I stood at the back, behind a sea of tailored black coats and polished shoes. The crowd was full of people who had benefited from Gideon's charm. Clients, board members, politicians, donors who liked their philanthropy with cameras. Up front, Leona sat with her spine straight, her hair pinned perfectly, her face calm in a way that made my stomach turn. She didn't glance back once, not even out of instinct. The speeches were careful and glossy. Gideon was called visionary, mentor, devoted father. One man praised his unshakable ethics, and I felt something bitter rise in my throat. I imagined standing up and shouting the truth, but I stayed quiet because I didn't want to give Leona another reason to hate me. I left before the final hymn, slipping out the side like a stain being wiped away. Outside, the air smelled clean, and the city moved on as if a life had ended exactly the way it was supposed to. Friday was colder and the sky looked bruised, barren. Pike and Fielding occupied the top level of a tower with mirrored windows, the kind of building that reflects everything and reveals nothing. I'd been there once, years ago, signing documents that felt permanent but clearly weren't. The lobby was marble and quiet, as if sound itself had to pay rent. When I gave my name at reception, the woman's eyebrows lifted before she smoothed her expression into professionalism. "Miss Vale," she said, using my old married name like it was still mine to carry. "She's already inside." The phrasing made it clear who she was. I walked toward the conference room and heard voices through the thick door, then the immediate drop into silence when I entered. Leona was at the head of the table, placed there like a crown. She wore a pale suit that looked expensive in a way that didn't need a label to announce itself. Her eyes flicked to me, then away, as if acknowledging me was optional. "Mara," she said, not Mom, not even Mother. Just the shortened version of my name, sharpened into a reminder that I had been reduced. I sat near the door, the position of someone who might be asked to leave. The attorney, Dennis Pike, came in carrying a folder thick enough to look like it contained a whole life in paper. He was older now, silver at the temples, still neatly pressed, still careful with his face. I remembered him from the plea deal, how he avoided meeting my eyes when Gideon's people took control of the narrative. Dennis greeted Leona first, then nodded at me like I was a formality. Leona checked her phone and said, "Can we do this quickly? I'm due in court later." Dennis didn't react, but his hand tightened on the folder. "Your father insisted both of you be present," he said. "No proxies, no video calls. He wanted you to hear everything in the same room." Leona's jaw tightened. Something in the air shifted, like the room itself leaned in to listen. Dennis opened the folder and began reading the legal language, the kind that sounds calm while it rearranges lives. Leona's foot tapped under the table. I kept my hands folded so she wouldn't see them shaking. The first gifts were exactly what Leona expected, and I could tell by the slight softening around her eyes. Dennis read out a luxury apartment in the Harbor District, furnished, along with a vacation condo in Silver Dunes. Then he reached the company shares. Leona would inherit a controlling stake, the power, the name, the entire public legacy. She sat taller, like she could already feel the weight of it on her shoulders. For a few seconds, she looked almost like a child with a long-promised prize. Then Dennis turned a page and said, "These bequests include attached disclosures." Leona frowned. "Disclosures?" Dennis's voice stayed steady, almost too steady. The apartment, he explained, carried a large equity loan Gideon had taken for medical costs and other obligations. The vacation condo had pending property disputes. And the firm, the jewel the empire, was sitting on top of multiple lawsuits, tax investigations, and a cash reserve that had been quietly drained by risky positions and private settlements. Leona's face tightened as the numbers kept coming. She stared as if she could bend reality by willpower alone. "That can't be right," she said, and for the first time her voice shook. Dennis looked at her and said, "It's right. Your father demanded transparency. He wanted the truth delivered with the inheritance." Then Dennis looked down, turned another page, and reached my line. I braced for humiliation. I had learned to expect it. "Tamara Vale," he read, "I leave $20. Leona's laugh snapped out like a slap. $20, she repeated, savoring it. "That's perfect. That's exactly what you deserve." Her eyes found mine, bright with something that wasn't relief. "You ruined him. You ruined us." I kept my face calm because arguing would only feed her certainty. Dennis didn't pause, didn't smile, didn't apologize. He flipped another page and another as if the $20 were only the first beat in a longer song. "Tamara Vale," he continued, "I additionally leave." The room seemed to shrink. The list that followed was not small, not symbolic, not polite. A house on Cliffmere Road, a warehouse property downtown, a collection of classic cars, several storage units containing art, investments, accounts. A trust that would pay yearly sums with inflation adjustments. The total was staggering. Leona's expression drained, then tightened, then cracked into disbelief. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out at first. Dennis kept reading anyway, because paper doesn't care who it hurts. Leona found her voice in pieces. "This is wrong," she said. "This is fraud. He was sick. He was manipulated." She stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I'll contest it. Dennis raised his hand, and the motion stopped her mid-breath. "Your father anticipated that response," he said, and slid a smaller envelope across the table. "Medical competency affidavits, recorded evaluations, and a video of him signing the will while statting on camera why he made these decisions." Leona stared at the envelope like it was contaminated. Dennis then pulled out a second sealed packet, thicker, handwritten. "And there is a letter," he said. "He instructed me to read it aloud, not summarize, not provide copies first. Aloud, in this room." Leona's throat worked as if she wanted to swallow words back down. I felt my heart beat in my ears because I suddenly understood the cruelty of Gideon's timing. He didn't just leave money. He left theater. He left a trap, designed to make the truth land like a punch. Dennis opened the letter and began, and Gideon's voice returned through ink. He addressed Leona directly, calling her by her full name, the way he used to when he wanted authority. He told her she would feel angry, betrayed, and humiliated, and he said he wanted her to feel it because it matched what I had felt for decades. Then came the line that split the room open. He confessed that the theft had been his, not mine. He wrote that he had moved the money to cover catastrophic losses from reckless trades and private debts he couldn't explain away. He admitted he had panicked, and that I had offered myself as the shield because his illness made him fear he would die under investigation. Leona's face turned so pale it looked painted. Dennis's voice stayed measured, but the words were dynamite. Gideon wrote that I wasn't a criminal, that I was the person who paid for his survival, and that he had let Leona hate me because he was too cowardly to surrender the hero role. He wrote about watching me rebuild in a strip mall while he accepted awards under clean lighting. He wrote that every success after the scandal was built on my ruin. But the letter wasn't only confession. It was accusation, and it aimed in more directions than I expected. Gideon admitted he had been paying settlements quietly for years, that he had used the company to cover personal mistakes, that the empire he displayed was a facade held up by borrowed money and intimidation. He told Leona the business she was inheriting was wounded because he wanted her to stop worshipping appearances. Then he dropped a twist that made my breath hitch. He wrote that someone else had known. He wrote that Dennis Pike had begged him to tell the truth earlier, and Gideon had threatened to destroy Dennis's career if he did. Dennis's eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second, and in that glance I saw shame that had matured into something heavier. Gideon then wrote that he left me the bulk of the estate not as generosity, but as repayment, and that he had arranged it in a way designed to force Leona to confront the story she'd been fed. He told her she could contest the will, fight for money stained by my suffering, or she could choose to be better than him. The room felt too bright. Leona's hands shook on the table, and for the first time I saw her not as a cold professional, but as a person realizing her foundation was built on lies. Then Gideon's letter turned again, and this is where the air truly changed. He wrote that the embezzlement wasn't just a single act of desperation. He wrote that, months before the scandal, he had discovered a leak inside the firm, someone feeding sensitive client information to a rival. He suspected it was close, someone who understood legal structures and could hide tracks. He never proved it, but the suspicion had poisoned him. He wrote that the day Leona called me years ago, the day she told me she hoped I'd disappear, he had listened from the hallway and felt proud, because he believed her hatred made her strong. He wrote bluntly that he had shaped her into a weapon and regretted it too late. Leona's eyes filled, but her face stayed rigid, as if crying would confirm weakness. When Dennis finished, the pages fluttered slightly in his hands, and for a moment nobody moved. Outside the glass, the city carried on with its indifferent traffic, unaware that a family's history had just been rewritten in a conference room. Leona finally spoke, but the words came out broken. "Is it true?" she asked, not to Dennis, but to me, as if I was the only witness that mattered. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. I wanted to reach for her, but my body remembered 1,000 rejections and stayed still. "Yes," I said softly. "It's true." She stared at me like she was seeing my face for the first time, searching for the monster she'd been taught to recognize. You let me believe it," she whispered, and the anger in her sounded frightened now. "You let me hate you." I swallowed the old reflex to defend myself with bitterness. "You were a teenager," I said, "and he was your father. You needed someone solid to hold on to. I chose for you to have that, even if it meant you had to lose me." Her mouth trembled. "You went to prison for him," she said, and tears finally spilled. "And he let you." I nodded once. The word "let" hung between us like smoke. What happened next wasn't neat, and it wasn't the kind of reconciliation people write into feel-good endings. Leona stood up, took 2 steps as if she meant to leave, then turned back sharply and slammed her palm on the table hard enough to make the pens jump. "All these years," she said, voice rising, "you could have told me. You could have shown me proof." Her hands balled into fists. "You didn't even try." The accusation stung because part of it was true. I had tried in letters. I had tried in silence. I had tried by surviving. But I hadn't fought like a person with nothing left to lose because I still thought losing her entirely was possible. "I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid you'd think it was another lie. Afraid he'd poison you further. Afraid that if I pushed you, cut me off so completely I'd never even know if you were alive." Leona's chest heaved like she had been running. Dennis gathered his papers quietly, eyes down, and stood. "I'll give you both privacy," he said, and his voice sounded older than his years. He left the room and shut the door gently, like he was closing a casket. Leona sank to the floor beside my chair, but not gracefully, not like someone performing remorse. She dropped as if her bones gave up. Her head pressed against my knee, and she sobbed with the raw, ugly sounds people make when the truth breaks them open. I froze at first, my hands hovering, because I hadn't held her in so long I wasn't sure I was allowed. Then instinct won, and I rested my palm on her hair, smoothing it the way I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I'm sorry," she choked, words muffled. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I felt tears slide down my own face, hot and humiliating. "I know," I whispered, though what I meant was, "I know you didn't know. I know you were used. I know I still love you." We stayed like that until the sobs slowed into shaking breaths and the light outside shifted, turning the glass darker as if the sky was listening too. When Leona lifted her head, her mascara had smeared, her face blotched, her perfection gone. Strangely, it made her look younger, more human, like the child I remembered. "I can't take it," she said suddenly. "The apartment, the shares, any of it." Her voice hardened again, but this time it was aimed inward. "If I keep it, I'm keeping the reward for what he did to you." I wanted to tell her money is not morality, that refusing it wouldn't undo the past, but I understood what she was trying to do, punish herself because punishing Gideon was no longer possible. "He wanted you to learn something," I said carefully. "Not just guilt, responsibility, the kind that lasts after the anger fades." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, furious at her own tears. "Then teach me," she said. "I don't know how to build anything that isn't sharp. I don't know how to win without crushing someone." She looked at me, desperate and blunt. "If I'm going to carry his name, I want it to mean something different, but I don't even know where to start." That's when a second twist came, and it didn't arrive from Gideon's letter. It arrived from Leona's mouth, heavy and hesitant. "There's something else," she said, staring at the floor. "I didn't call you because I wanted you there." My stomach dropped. "I called because I thought the will would destroy you." She swallowed. "I thought he was leaving you nothing, publicly. I thought I'd watch it happen, and I wanted to feel it." The honesty hit me like cold water. She was confessing to cruelty, not excusing it, and that mattered. "He spent years telling me you were poison," she continued. "When I started at my firm, he used his connections. He made sure my first big cases were against people like you. People with records, people no one defended. He said it would make me strong." Her voice broke again. "I believed him. I thought strength meant never looking back." I listened, and I felt something shift in me, not forgiveness, but clarity. Gideon hadn't only stolen money. He'd stolen my daughter's softness and replaced it with steel. And now the steel was cutting her from the inside. We didn't leave that day as a neat mother-daughter pair walking into sunlight. We left with a plan, and plans are messier than apologies. Leona agreed to keep the shares, not as a prize, but as a burden to be handled correctly. I agreed to help, not because Gideon asked from beyond the grave, but because Leona asked in the present. In the weeks that followed, the truth leaked the way truth always does, through whispers, then through documents, then through reporters who smelled blood. The firm's board panicked. Clients threatened to pull funds. Old enemies crawled out with lawsuits sharpened by opportunity. Leona was attacked from every angle, and she deserved some of it because she had spent years attacking others without mercy. But she surprised me. She didn't hide. She didn't blame me. She stood in front of a boardroom full of furious men and said, "My mother was framed. We will correct the record." The room went dead silent, then exploded. She called it reform. They called it suicide. She looked at me afterward, eyes hollow, and said, "Is this what building feels like? Like you're tearing down a lie with your bare hands?" I said yes, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I sold properties I never wanted and liquidated investments Gideon used as trophies. Not because I was greedy, but because the firm needed oxygen, and oxygen costs money. We negotiated settlements, not by groveling, but by opening books that Gideon kept closed. In the process, we discovered why the company was bleeding. It wasn't just reckless trades. Someone had been siphoning funds quietly for years through vendors that didn't exist, invoices that were too small to draw attention, and legal fees routed through shell firms. The pattern was familiar, which made my skin crawl because it mirrored the crime I had taken the blame for. Leona brought the data to me late one night, her face lit by her laptop screen, and whispered, "It wasn't only Dad." The words made the room feel colder. Gideon had confessed, yes, but confession can be incomplete when it's designed to die with you. We followed the paper trail together and found names of executives still in the building, people who had smiled at Gideon's funeral, people who had called him ethical. Some of them had been in the room the day I was arrested, pretending surprise with practiced faces. Leona wanted to destroy them the way she had been taught, quick, brutal, absolute. I stopped her. "If you do it like that," I told her. You'll become him again. She slammed her fist on my kitchen table, furious. They stole from you, she said. They stole from everyone. I nodded. Then we do it properly, I said. We document, we report, we protect the employees who didn't know, we build a foundation that doesn't need lies. It took weeks, and during those weeks, Leona and I fought more than we hugged. Some days she'd say something sharp without thinking, and I'd feel 21 years of rejection slam back into my ribs. Some days I'd overcorrect, trying to mother her too hard, and she'd flinch as if affection was another trap. But we kept showing up, and in adult relationships, showing up is the closest thing to magic. The day we returned to the company headquarters, I wore a plain suit and flat shoes and carried a worn leather bag like I did in the strip mall office. The lobby looked exactly the same as the day they marched me out, only shinier, as if time had been spent polishing over the stain. Leona walked beside me, no designer armor, no performance smile. She looked tired in a way that made her seem honest. People stared as we passed. Some faces held respect. Some held contempt. Some held fear, which meant they had something to lose. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt like a countdown. When the doors opened, the floor buzzed with whispers. Leona had sent a company-wide message the night before, stating plainly that the prior conviction was wrongful and that a full independent audit would be conducted. She didn't ask for patience. She warned them that the era of silence was over. A few employees resigned immediately. Others stayed and watched, eyes sharp, waiting to see who would fall. My new office wasn't the corner suite I once had. It was smaller, with a view of the river and a desk that didn't pretend to be a throne. Leona stood in the doorway as I set my bag down. "Mom," she said, and the word still sounded unfamiliar in her mouth, like she was testing whether it would burn. I turned, and she looked at me with a kind of cautious gratitude that hurt more than hatred ever did. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving, for not using the money to disappear." I exhaled slowly. "I thought about it," I admitted. "I thought about buying peace. Then I remembered peace built on avoidance doesn't last." She nodded once, swallowing. "I want to do it right," she said, "even if everyone laughs." I told her something I hadn't said in years. "Let them." Then I added, "We'll be too busy building to listen." Later, alone, I stood at the window and watched the river slide past, steady and uninterested in human drama. I thought about Gideon's final performance. The $20, the staged humiliation, the truth delivered like a delayed explosion. Part of me wanted to hate him for the theater, for making my reunion with my daughter happen under fluorescent lights and legal paper instead of warmth and choice. But another part of me understood that Gideon had always been a man who needed control, even in repentance. He couldn't simply apologize. He had to direct the reaction. Still, he had done the one thing he'd refused to do for 2 decades. He told the truth in a way that couldn't be buried. And that truth gave Leona and me a chance, not to erase the past, but to stop living inside his version of it. My phone buzzed with a photo Leona had sent from the night before, the two of us eating cheap noodles in a quiet restaurant, laughing because the waiter had misunderstood our order 3 times and didn't care. We looked awkward, like 2 people learning each other from scratch. We also looked real. I won't pretend the ending is perfect. Some nights Leona still wakes up angry, and she calls me just to say, "I can't believe I did that to you," and I can hear the shame clawing at her. Some mornings I still catch myself waiting for betrayal, because once you've been framed by someone you loved, trust doesn't return like a switch. There are people in the city who will never believe my innocence, because it ruins a story they enjoyed. There are clients who will pull their money, because integrity is expensive when you're used to convenience. There are days when Leona's old instincts flare, and she tries to win instead of repair, and I have to remind her that victory without truth is just another lie wearing a suit. But we are doing the work anyway, the slow kind, the kind nobody applauds. We are learning how to be a family without a villain role assigned to me. And when I sit at my desk, the same kind of desk I once sat at before everything collapsed, I sometimes think about the smallest, strangest detail of Gideon's will, the $20. The cruel little spark meant to make the rest burn brighter. It was a reminder that he understood people. He understood timing. He understood what would make Leona feel certainty, then rip it away. I hate that he used manipulation to deliver justice, and I hate that it worked. But I also understand something now that I didn't understand when I signed that confession all those years ago. Sacrifice without truth isn't noble. It's a prison that keeps growing. I lost decades because I thought silence was protection. Now, I'm done protecting lies. Leona and I are building something that won't need a polished story to survive. The city outside hums, indifferent and loud, and inside the glass tower that once displayed my disgrace, I open my laptop and get to work on a future that finally has room for the truth.